When we talk about the Cuban Revolution, one name always stands front and center: Fidel Castro. But behind him, in the shadows of history, stood a man just as crucial, just as revolutionary, and, in many ways, just as powerful. This is the story of Raúl Castro. The soldier. The brother. The strategist behind the scenes, and eventually, the man who stepped into his brother's shoes to lead Cuba into a new chapter. Raúl Modesto Castro Ruz was born on June 3, 1931, in Byron, Cuba. He was the youngest of 7 children in a well-off farming family. His father was a Spanish immigrant, his mother Cuban-born. Life in the Castro household was complex, privilege mixed with rebellion. Like his brother Fidel, Raúl was educated in Catholic schools before heading to the University of Havana, where he became politically radicalized. But while Fidel leaned toward nationalist rebellion, Raúl had something different in mind: Marxism. At a young age, Raúl became involved with communist and socialist youth groups and even visited the Soviet bloc in the early 1950s. In 1953, Raúl joined Fidel in the infamous attack on the Moncada barracks, the first failed attempt to spark a revolution against Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista. Though the mission was a disaster, it lit the spark of a revolution. Raúl was imprisoned, along with Fidel, and later released in an amnesty. From there, they fled to Mexico, and it was there, in exile, that Raúl met another key figure in the revolution, Che Guevara. Raúl introduced Che to Fidel, a meeting that would change the course of Latin American history. Soon after, the Castros, Che, and a small band of rebels set sail on the Granma yacht in 1956, returning to Cuba to ignite the revolution. Raúl was no sidekick. He was one of the original commanders of the guerrilla movement. While Fidel led the main front, Raúl commanded a column in Cuba's eastern mountains. Known for being tough, disciplined, and loyal, Raúl played a crucial role in the eventual victory over Batista's forces in 1959. After the revolution succeeded, Fidel became prime minister, and Raúl was appointed Minister of the Armed Forces, a position he would hold for nearly 50 years. He helped shape the Cuban military into one of the most capable in Latin America, thanks in part to close ties with the Soviet Union. Raúl was the bridge between Cuba and Moscow. A staunch Marxist, he secured arms, advisors, and economic aid from the Soviets. And when the Cuban Missile Crisis erupted in 1962, he stood ready, willing to go to war, if it meant defending the revolution. For decades, Raúl worked behind the scenes, often viewed as the cold, pragmatic counterbalance to Fidel's fiery idealism. He was the enforcer, the one who kept the military strong, the party loyal, and the system intact. But over time, change was inevitable. In 2006, Fidel Castro fell seriously ill. For the first time since 1959, he transferred power, temporarily, to his brother Raúl. Many wondered, would Raúl be a mere placeholder? Or would he take Cuba in a new direction? In 2008, Raúl Castro officially became president of Cuba. And almost immediately, he began to make cautious, but meaningful, changes. He allowed small private businesses, permitted citizens to own cell phones and computers, and opened the door for Cubans to travel abroad. These weren't sweeping reforms, but in the Cuban context, they were revolutionary in their own right. Perhaps the most dramatic moment of Raúl's presidency came in 2014, when he and U.S. President Barack Obama announced a historic thaw in relations between Cuba and the United States. Embassies reopened. Travel and trade expanded. And in 2016, Obama visited Havana, the first sitting U.S. president to do so in nearly 90 years. Raúl stood beside him, symbolizing a new era. But not everyone saw Raúl as a reformer. Critics argued that the changes were too slow, too limited, and that Cuba remained a one-party state with strict control over dissent. In 2018, Raúl Castro stepped down as president, handing power to Miguel Díaz-Canel. But he remained head of the Communist Party, the most powerful position in Cuba, until 2021, when he finally retired from politics. So who was Raúl Castro? To some, he was a revolutionary hero, the quiet architect of a socialist state that defied U.S. pressure for decades. To others, he was a hardliner, the man who kept Cuba under one-party rule, even while promising change. But love him or hate him, Raúl Castro was never just Fidel's brother. He was the guardian of a revolution. And a man who, in the end, tried to steer Cuba through the beginning of its next chapter. Found this story compelling? Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more history deep dives.